Hey guys, there's been a lot of talk in the Japanese media recently about death from overwork, and the reason that it's been so high profile lately is there has been a couple of high profile deaths. In particular, there was a reporter who worked for one of the news channels, TV channels, who killed herself recently. So actually technically it's not really death from overwork, it's death from suicide. That's actually what's happening. But because they are saying that the suicide was as a result of being overworked, they're calling it death from overwork. And then, so what's happening is there's been a few high profile cases of sort of high profile people killing themselves and jumping off buildings and things like that, which has put it back in the media, in the press. And so then in reaction to that, what's been happening is some companies have been doing press releases saying that, okay, from now our company is going to try very hard to help avoid unnecessary deaths by overwork. Okay, so some of you might recognize we've actually talked about a little bit of this. This will overlap a lot of previous videos. We did a video previously about suicide. We did a video recently about solving problems and how about how people often go about unusual ways of trying to solve problems here, or trying not to solve problems. Another video that's also really relevant to this one is we made one a while ago about hardship and suffering, and that's really relevant to this too. So basically what they're saying is that these people are killing themselves as a result of being overworked, and then in response to that, some of the companies are saying, okay, from now we're going to ban overtime, or from now we're going to bring in new policies to help people not be so overworked so that they're not so likely to kill themselves. Which is, it's good that they're doing some sort of response to it. But interestingly, because it's been in the media a lot lately, obviously the suicide issue is a really difficult thing to talk about with people here. People don't really want to talk about it terribly much, and you don't usually see it in the media here at all, and people don't normally want to talk about it. But because this has been an issue recently, we sort of took it as a bit of an excuse to bring it up with some friends and some family members, and just to ask them a little bit about it. And interestingly, and this is often the case, when we ask people about these things, quite often we're surprised by the responses. And there were a few responses that were really sort of eye-opening, and it was like, yeah, that's really interesting. And so what we're saying is, okay, if you felt that you couldn't handle your work because you had too much pressure, what would you do? And because most of them were just saying, oh, more Ganbare mas, more, and so I'd try harder. And okay, so you tried as hard as you can and you just can't cope anymore, and it's starting to affect your health and it's starting to make you unhealthy. What would you do? And so a couple of them said, go to the doctor. I'd go to the doctor. Okay. So I'm not sure how much difference that would make in Japan, going to the doctor. And then, okay, so the next question was, if you thought that your work was affecting your health, it was damaging your health, what would you do? And the answers were like, I'd just take more care of my health. So obviously what we were fishing for was for someone to say, oh, I'd start looking for another job, and then it wasn't happening, of course. And here's that, we made the video about hardship and suffering. It's sort of like, in Japanese way of thinking, is that hardship and suffering are natural, and it's sort of what everybody wants to be. They all, nobody says to you, when you say to people, how are you, they don't say, oh great, my life's too easy and I have lots of leisure time and it's all too easy. It's always hard. They're always telling you how busy they are and how hard it is, and because it's sort of seen that that's good. That if your life is easy and you've got lots of free time, then you're not trying hard enough. If you say you spent your weekend lying on your back watching TV, that's no good, because you're not trying hard enough. You should be out doing something, And there's this constant thing for hardship and suffering, and so sort of fishing to try to get people to say. And actually, to one guy I said, if you went to your doctor and your doctor said your job is really damaging your health, the stress from your job is really damaging your health, he actually said, I'd find another doctor. So we could not get them, trying to steer people into saying, oh, I'd look for another job or I'd quit my job, could not get them to say it. And it's sort of not surprising really, but thought if we sort of backed them into a corner, we could get to a point where they'd say it. They wouldn't say it. And then really a couple of real things that were really like, oh, of course, should have seen that coming. Wasn't because we suspected that the co-workers usually, and I mentioned this in a video a long time ago about someone who needed to quit their job, but wouldn't quit their job. It was just a part-time job, but she wouldn't quit her job because she didn't want to let down her co-workers. And I said to her at the time, it was one of our family members, and I said to her at the time, you're a part-time employee, you know, just give them a few weeks notice and they'll train up someone else for your position and you can leave and that person can take over. And oh, no, she didn't want to let down her co-workers. So we know that that's one of the factors that stops people from leaving jobs that they find too stressful, that they don't want to let down their co-workers because they'll be seen as deserting the team, right? So we expected that. The other one was the family. One young guy, he's only in his mid-20s, and he said his parents would be angry. I said, what would happen if you quit your job? And he said, my parents would be angry. And I said, what about if you told them that your doctor told you to quit your job because you had too much stress? And he said, no, they'd still be angry. And so the point of this explaining this is that it's not just that the boss at work gives these guys more work than they can handle and more stress than they can handle, and in the end they just kill themselves. It's much deeper than that. The reason is, and this goes for people in their jobs in Japan and also for students. We talked about that in that video recently. There's a lot of school students and university students suicide in Japan as well. And the reason is, and we've talked about this with the hardship and suffering, we've talked about this on other videos as well, the pressure gets higher and higher. And all you ever hear in Japan, when people are under stress and people are struggling and people are working hard, and everybody says, Ganbare, Ganbare, try hard, try hard, try hard. Ganbare, Ganbare. Kids chant it. If you see kids playing sport or doing something like that, the other kids around the sidelines will all be chanting Ganbare, 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 and it's the kids and the parents. And it's just, you know, and of course usually in day-to-day life, that Ganbare way of thinking is really good. Because, you know, when Japanese people do something, they really try hard. And that's really deep-seated here. You can say Ganbare to a 2-year-old Japanese kid and they get it. It's already in their psyche. You know, if they're about to have an injection at the doctor's or something, you know, and they're really scared, you say to them, Ganbare, Ganbare, and you can see them bucking up. It's so deep in the Japanese psyche, this whole Ganbare thing, how important it is. And because after people try their best, people go, oh, Ganbarimashita, you know, you did your best. So this whole focus that society, so you imagine your friends and your family and everybody you know is focused on this Ganbare, Ganbare, Ganbare thing. And then after you do something, Ganbarimashita. So it's deep in the psyche, which means when you're having a hard time, or when you're stressed, or when you're not coping, or when you're struggling, all you will get is Ganbare, 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 Ganbare. And because up to a certain point, that's good advice, right? Do your best, do your best. Up to a certain point, that's worthwhile advice. But once people reach their limit, telling them to Ganbare is what eventually results in the suicide. So these people who are finding themselves in a situation where they're not coping with their work or with pressure of life or whatever they're not coping with, and they just feel like there's no escape because everybody around them, their families and their friends and everybody's just telling them to keep trying. And I mean, we've seen the results of this personally. We've lost a family member over this, you know, because he just got to a point where he couldn't take it, and everybody just kept telling him Ganbare. And he wasn't in our immediate family. He was a little bit removed, but close enough that we saw it unfold, you know. And it's just tragic. It's just sad, and particularly when you've come from another society where, you know, a lot of our societies, if somebody's reaching their limit and isn't coping, you know, their family's going to tell them, look, take it easy, relax, you know, take some time off work, or quit your job, that job's killing you, quit your job. That's what, you know, in a lot of our societies, a lot of you guys would recognize that way of thinking, right? If someone that you know, or family member or a friend, is reaching their limit and isn't coping because of their job, you know, you're going to be telling them to get another job, aren't you? Look, go see the boss, tell him you need some time off. You know, and tell him you need some time off, or tell him you need a helper, or you need someone else to help you, or tell him, or quit. You know, and that's, for us, that seems like the obvious solution. That if you're in a job where you're not happy, and I mean, reality too, we made a myths video on our myth playlist about the Japanese people being overworked thing, because the reality is that a lot of it is illusion. A lot of the people here that appear to be really busy and, oh, it's really hard, they're really just doing that hardship and suffering thing. And that quite often they're not. Quite often there's a lot of faffing involved, and the people will sit in the office here because they don't want to be the first one to leave at night. So they'll sit here at night and they'll pretend to be busy and pretend to be working hard because they don't want to be the first one to leave, and they don't want to leave before their boss and all that sort of thing. So a lot of it is illusion, but there are also this percentage of people who are genuinely overworked and overstressed. And we know some people in this situation. We know a 68-year-old guy who should have retired 3 years ago, and the company keeps pulling him back in to do projects for the company. And in the last 5 years, he's had a heart attack and a stroke, right? He recovered from a heart attack, and not long after that, he had a stroke. Now, in any other country in the world, just about, a 68-year-old man who's already had a heart attack and a stroke, they'd be saying, please don't come to work anymore, you know? But they don't. The company keeps pulling him back. We've got a job, can you come and help us? And they pull him back in. And all his co-workers pull him back in. And his family say, Ganbare, Ganbare. I mean, again, in a lot of countries, if your 68-year-old father or uncle or friend, you know, had had a heart attack and a stroke, and you know, you'd be telling him to stop work, wouldn't you? I mean, he doesn't need to work. He's not working for the money. He's working because he feels obliged. The company asks him, and the idea of saying no just wouldn't cross his mind. You know, it's just automatic what he does, and everybody else thinks that that's the right thing to do. You know, he's going back and supporting the company. He's going back and doing some work for the company. Ganbare, Ganbare, Ganbare. So, as you can imagine, with this being the case, the company giving people too much work, and again, how are they going to mandate that people don't work too hard? How are they going to fix that? I mean, a couple of the companies here have said they're going to stop staff doing overtime, but you know, that might work, or it might mean that people are going to be trying to do the same amount of work in less time, which might end up resulting in more stress. Right, so obviously this is a really, really complex problem, and it's really a society thing. It's not just the companies that are to blame, as you can see. It's much deeper, and because there's other people here killing themselves for other reasons, because they've got other stresses that they're not coping with. They're not coping with their family, and again, this goes back. We talked about this on the suicide video. There's a whole thing here with mental health. People feel hesitant to go see a mental health professional, and that's just not considered normal here. Going to see a mental health professional, or seeing a counsellor, or even talking to your friends about your problems isn't something that people do here. So, and that's the other thing, of course, that these people that are stressed out from work and that are at the end of their tether and can't take much more, then they're not likely to complain to their friends and talk to their friends about it, or their family about it. Definitely not their co-workers about it, or their boss about it. And they'll just keep it to themselves. And quite often people sort of don't know. And then they sort of see it when people have either just too much stress and they're burnt out and they kill themselves, or they end up probably having, some of them would probably end up having some sort of psychological sickness as a result, which would be some sort of, you know, depression, or, you know, who knows, the different problems we can end up with from too much stress. And then what happens is, after they kill themselves, people just say, they like to label it something simple. So that's why they like this death from overwork thing. That's the end of it. We don't have to talk about it anymore. He was overworked to death. And it's sort of, nobody seems, they're sort of working to fix it, but it sort of almost seems like that's a pretty noble way to go when they put it like that. They're not saying that he killed himself. They're saying death from overwork. You know, he's overworked to death. And it's not really the case, is it? Obviously the person was overstressed. They felt they couldn't cope with it, and they thought that the only option, or the best option to them to solve it, was to kill themselves. That's the truth of it, you know. So you can see how complex it is, you know, and it's another one of those things here where they have a problem and their solution to it, like the video we made recently, is sort of a, you know, finger in the dike, or a cup in the ocean, or something like that type thing, where it's just what they do, their response to it is so minimal, is so sort of simplistic, that, you know, it's not going to do it. Really the only way to stop this happening, and it's the same as with the other 25,000 suicides a year, really the only way is to make people's health and well-being and mental health more of a priority. You know, at the moment it's just not a priority. You know, you just got to struggle, and then an acceptance that talking about these things and trying to resolve problems is the only solution. You know, because at the moment nobody talks about it. But again, we've talked about this before. For things to change in Japan, I mean, you're talking massive change to the sort of the fundamental thinking of Japanese people. You know, it'd be rarely a day would go by you wouldn't hear someone say Ganbare here. So to try and go from that to where, okay, if you're struggling, then it's okay to have a break. You know, if your work is doing you harm, then you should just quit and get another job. To go from where the Japanese thinking is now and the Japanese society is now, to that point where, you know, for the sake of your health you should quit your job. I mean, that's just a world apart. It's just a world apart. Could not get people to get to that this last week. This last week talking about this with people, and even straight out saying it. Look, what about, you know, if you really thought it was really damaging your health, you know, what about quitting your job? And it's just like, oh no, you know, my parents would be angry, or my wife would be angry, or, you know, there's all these co-workers, my boss, and all these people that, you know, no, I couldn't quit my job. So, you know, it's just one of those ones where you can't see a solution to it. Just can't see it happening. It'll probably be one of those things where long term, they do say that younger Japanese people now are a little bit more, they've been influenced a little bit more by the Western way of thinking about looking after yourself, and that they do say, now how true this is, who knows, but it does seem to be commonly said. People do say, oh, you know, young people are more likely to change jobs now if they're not happy in the job that they're in. They're more likely to change jobs and get a different job. And they're more likely to pick a job that's not so difficult or so stressful. But it's hard to know if that's really true. We haven't seen firsthand any examples of that. We haven't heard any conversations about anybody actually doing that, saying that I picked a job because it's less stressful than the other job. I've never heard anybody say that. So quite often too, these things are the concept of the other way of thinking will sometimes be here, because of course, you know, Japanese people watch this video, Japanese people watch BBC, CNN, ABC, you know, basically anything that you guys can watch in your other countries, we can watch here. So obviously there's a lot of Japanese people that are aware of these different ways of thinking, and quite often that's what you'll hear. They'll say, oh yeah, the Western way of thinking, you know, they look after your health and family comes first. And there are people here who understand that, who get that way of thinking, but there's a huge difference between, oh yes, that's very good. And people will tell you, well, if you tell someone, oh look, in Western countries, usually family comes first, and your health, and then the company. And they go, yes, and quite often they've heard that, they're aware of that, but it doesn't mean that they're prepared to, that you know, they can't do it. They can't do it. If everybody you know, and I mean, it's easy to understand when you live here, because if everybody you know If everybody you know just keeps saying to you, try harder, try harder, try harder, and you go, oh, I just can't cope anymore, this is just too much. Try harder, and everybody, your girlfriend or your wife or your husband or your neighbour or your family and friends and parents and brothers and sisters and best friends from school and everybody you know is all just saying, Ganbare, try harder, try harder. It's really unlikely anyone here is going to be giving you the advice to change your job. You know, and even if one of them did, the rest of them aren't. The rest of them are all saying, oh, Ganbare, you know, it's a good job you've got in a good company, you just have to try harder, you know. And we've seen this firsthand ourselves, and then when the person does kill themselves, they're all surprised. And they'll tell you, oh, yes, he was sick. He was sick from too much work. Or just he was sick. That's quite often what they'll say. He was sick. And that's the end of it. There's no sitting around later analysing it and working out why and, oh, geez, maybe we should have given him more support, or, you know, there's none of that. It's just like, to them it sort of seems like almost a logical sort of, you know, he had so much work that it made him sick. This mystery sick that byoki they say. Byoki. And that could just mean he's just straight out overworked and couldn't cope anymore, and he was stressed out and he blew a valve and killed himself. Or it could mean he actually clinically had something happening. He had depression or he had some other clinical thing. But to them, none of that, they don't differentiate between any of that. If you kill yourself, that means you must have been sick, right? So whatever, it doesn't matter. What the details were doesn't matter. He was sick, so he killed himself. You know, and with this work thing, they connect the work. Sometimes there's also older people here who will actually have some sort of physical illness, and they don't want to be a burden to their family, so they kill themselves and things like that. That sort of stuff happens as well. But for high school kids and university students and people who work, you know, that's it. Oh, you know, lots of stress with school, or lots of stress with university, or lots of stress with work. So he was sick, so he killed himself, or she killed herself because she was sick, because he was sick, and that's it. And of course, because there's not a lot of discussion about it, there's not a lot of learning goes on either. So, you know, instead of like we do in a lot of other countries, we analyse these things and we work out why, and then we try and work out solutions, you know. And if you know these stories and you know what leads to these things, you can try and avoid it, can't you? Whereas this, you know, that doesn't sort of go on here. It's like, no, it's all simplified. It's not talked about. It's not talked about in the media because it's too depressing. It's not talked about amongst families. Talking about this with people, we could only get away with it at the moment because it has been in the media, but we had to be really careful about it because people don't want to talk about it. You can feel it. There's one guy, the guy that said he'd changed doctors, did not want to talk about it. Yeah, it was almost like he didn't want to accept that there was a connection between the stress from job and being physically sick and killing yourself. It's almost like he just didn't want to accept it. He's just sort of pushing it aside. Didn't want to know about it. Didn't want to know. I'd change doctors, he said. So he just, you know. And that's often the reaction you get to these sort of topics. No one wants to talk about it. So anyway, we talked about it. So there it is. It's a difficult one to talk about because there's obviously no easy solution. I mean, this might resolve itself over the next 100 years, maybe. Change here happens that slowly that it might take 100 years for this to get sort of under control, but in the meantime it's just the way it is, you know. So anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.